Hello, I'm so excited to see you all. Super grateful to be here. I'm missing your energy from the audience so much right now, and I'll try to muster up some of that here and picture you in front. So raise your hand if you think that chatter is an all-time high right now. You know, things like maybe just the amount of information we get every day, and maybe just the stories that we hear, and the kind of turbulence of the feelings that we feel all day long. Is that maybe at an all-time high? Just a show of hands. Yes, you. Well, it looks like everyone agrees that chatter is at an all-time high. So, what if I told you I had a vaccine? Or is it too soon to make that joke? Well, I can tell you that I do kind of have maybe something that will help, or at least helps me kind of get through that chatter every day. It's something I work very hard at, and it's the idea of a funny little word called awe, and AWE. It's something we don't use often in our vocabulary, but it's something I think about a lot. And the thing about awe is that it seems to align us with something greater than ourselves, and it connects us to something great. And if you think about, a friend of mine, Dr. David Yaden, who studies this and actually invented the AWES scale. And if you're super nerdy, go check it out. It's really cool work. He works with Johns Hopkins and has come up with this way of measuring awe. But he was saying, picture yourself at the Pacific Ocean, and you're there alone, and what is that feeling that comes up in you? And it's actually a feeling of, in some ways, kind of loneliness and insignificance, and this idea that it maybe belittles some things that we often treat as life and death. And I think we all know that feeling with all the chatter that's going on of, feeling like something is insurmountable, several times a day, and feeling feelings of anger and, maybe fear, and this kind of wild ride we go on all day long. And this idea that you could be by the Pacific Ocean and be sort of put into another place, another scale, that completely shifts your relationship to those problems and those differences, and to that thing that we tend to hang on to so tightly, which is our identity. It actually belittles that in a very healthy way. And I love citing. I love working with gallerists. I work with a lot of gallerists as a fine artist, and one of my favorite gallerists to work with is Cynthia Reeves, and she and I were chatting a few weeks ago, and she said that there's always a yearning for kindness and beauty, and that's something that we've had in the human nature for a long, long time, and I think that's just so cool. And I think kindness and beauty, at their best, are a form of awe. And when I think of those, and connecting with kindness and connecting with beauty, I think that's just a really, really core thing to us humans. And so while we can be talking about the Pacific Ocean in one breath, there's also this very kind of approachable sort of side of awe. And what I try to do in my work, and what I try to do with a lot of my time, if not the majority, is to try to make awe. And as designers and as creatives and as architects and artists, making up much of the audience, I really like to push this idea of making awe, and I want you to kind of experiment with that. And I'll kind of show you how I go about doing that. And maybe before talking about this idea of how I do that, I'd like to talk about the framework in the context in which I go about it. And there are kind of four major things that I think about a lot, and I think most artists would agree, and most creatives would agree, that these are sort of fundamentals. And while that might be a professional context, I also think that everyone could absorb this and kind of think about it. And those things are space, time, tools, and materials. And I'll kind of talk about those throughout this little session today. And I'll kind of start by talking about the space that I work in. And I grew up in a sign shop, a family-owned sign shop, and there was just about every kind of basic tool you needed to make about anything you wanted to make. And kind of being familiar with those tools was really, really helpful. And before we jump into tools, because there's a whole world there, the space in which those tools live. So this is a quick shot of a small studio I keep in Capitol Hill in Seattle. And it's very much a quiet space, a private space. And it's where I can be messy and kind of think alone and try things alone. And on a completely different scale, this is a space that was gifted by a patron, a giant 20,000 square foot warehouse that had a whole team that I was running. And I did that with a number of people: Josh Borsman, Quinn Kennedy, Monique Duran, a number of people. There's about 20 people or so, if not more, that were running around and trying to make all day long and kind of trying to create things that people could come in and experience that were interesting. So sometimes those spaces are really raw and dirty like this. And the space I'm talking to you in today is much more of this kind of hybrid of a gallery and a design studio and an artist studio. And it's in a public space, and that's really important to me, because making connections with people, although I consider myself way far on the introvert spectrum, it's so important to connect with people, even when it's maybe not comfortable. I have to do that because I don't get to do this for a living if I don't do that. But more importantly, those connections, I learn about where other people's minds and hearts are, and feed off of that energy and hopefully do the same for them. And, you know, it's fun to show these kind of different cool spaces and everything. And, you know, a lot of us, and at times in life that, you know, I haven't had spaces like this either. So there is this kind of other part of it, which is just making a really simple space for yourself. And this is just a quick photograph that I took while making this presentation. And so even if your space is just a small part of a table where you can lay things out and look at them clearly, I think it's just so important. And of course that ends up looking kind of cool too. So if you don't have a studio or an office or anything like that, do this in your house, do this with your kids. It end up making it part of the interior design. It's always just a cool thing to come across in your day, these things that you're thinking about, these observations that you're making. Take down a picture, you know, in your house, you know, take down maybe a painting or something, and just make a little, you know, frame it out if you have to, but make a little space where you can kind of post your ideas and observations. And, you know, I love, probably one of my favorite recent examples of someone talking about their space was RZA from Wu-Tang Clan. It's a funny reference, but he talks about in this new meditation album that he has out, he talks about the idea of him in Staten Island in his basement, and he had his kung fu videos, and he had his keyboard, and he would just start making music there as a kid, and that was just his little corner of the earth to kind of get out of the fray and to make something, you know, hopefully nuanced. I think, you know, space is an interesting one, but and there's kind of tricks to get around it that are really easy. But time is a whole other thing. We all know that, you know, time is the greatest commodity, and all those kind of natural parts of being human, and it's kind of something that's come up for me recently, is that time is always in contest with what Hemingway would call domestic successes, and he's kind of heavy-handed with this phrase, and it's kind of silly. But he says domestic success is a mere form of quitting. And I don't know exactly what he means by that, but, you know, and I would never say live your life like Hemingway, because, you know, good writer, but a bit of a train wreck in a lot of ways. But it is interesting. It's so interesting to think about what we put in the way of this, between us and the time it takes to seek awe. And so often that is something like a paying taxes. You know, we have to do that, I guess, and I think we should. But you know, that being kind of one of the few things that we really have to do. If you have kids, you have to take care of your kids, and that can take up so much time. But the interesting thing about kids is they're a form of awe themselves, and possibly the best form of awe that we know as humans. And so, you know, when I really distill it down, there are very, very, very few things that most of us have to tend to in life. And you know, it might be something, you know, paying the mortgage might be a thing that we think we have to do. But there's all sorts of ways to live more meagerly and more simply. And it's amazing how just cutting away at a few of those things makes an insane amount of time to do things that help us connect with the things around us. So it's all a huge push just to say, really list the things that you think you must do. And then, you know, of those things, what of those things can you explore in a kind of investigative kind of way that would lead you to awe? So, you know, if you're helping a kid study, that's just like total fertile ground for discovery and play. And it's just a matter of kind of putting that lens on it. And kind of switching to the other two. So we talked a little bit about space. We talked a little bit about time. And I think those are just, you know, kind of a couple of the harder ones. But kind of thinking about tools and materials. And I'll talk about tools and materials through my work. And kind of thinking about finding awe in observations. And kind of one of the more fun projects for me in the last year was a project I call How to See the Moon. And this was done at Cynthia Reeves Gallery, which I mentioned, and she's out at Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art. And I did this work along with Josh Boersman. And I started looking at kind of what we were going to do for this exhibition, and I had an idea that we might want to start thinking about the human relationship to space. And the human relationship to space is changing so vastly and quickly. You know, in the next 4 years, we're supposed to put people on the moon permanently. And when I started to look at that work, I started to say, okay, how can I help people that come across this work look at space in maybe a new way, or maybe just use it as a focal point. I started to look at this beautiful imagery that NASA has, and I started to talk to their archivists in still and moving imagery, and they were really fun to work with. And we started looking at all these incredibly high-resolution photos, and just by looking and being and immersing myself in these images, which are all public domain, I started to think about what that might do, or how we might look at space in the future. So just looking at having these great tools of observation at our fingertips, something like NASA, we're able to immerse ourselves in the awe of space. And awe comes in so many forms. Design is one of them. I work in architecture quite a bit, so I'll work on buildings like this. This is the Denny Substation project that was just finished a couple of years ago here in Seattle. And I'll work with you know, proper architects on these projects, so there are many amazing people that work on this. But my small hand in a project like this is looking at what sort of interventions can we put into a piece of architecture that is kind of atypical. So this has all sorts of sculpture interwoven into it. It has a whole sound installation that goes through an alley. It presents the identity of the space in an interesting way using neon. And it's just to say that pushing for something unexpected in architecture is super important and quite hard to do. And unless we kind of, again, take the time to set aside for that function specifically. So many things need to happen in architecture that it's hard to check all of the boxes well. And so just dedicating that time to this kind of human layer and these really special moments is something I find really fun. And the project that I'm showing you, this is a rendering, is a mass timber construction, very early sketch of a property in Paris that I've just been daydreaming about. And I'm so excited to play with new materials like mass timber, and actually Oregon leads the United States in mass timber construction. If you're an architect in the in the audience, definitely, you probably know about it more than I do, but definitely push for mass timber, renewable construction as much as you can. I'm so proud that Oregon is leading that in the country, and I'm hoping that the rest of us start to learn from that too. And this is a funny one is awe in the internet, and I mentioned the chatter and all the things that float around the internet, and how odd those are, and how much we just can't kind of avoid unimportant information. But I find the internet to be really cool, and I actually treat it as an artistic material. And the sort of images on the screen are work that I've done in the not too distant past. Some sculptures that move based on real-time wave heights out in the ocean. I was work with Ami McNeil. I worked with a small team in my studio to make a generative poetry installation that pulled from a huge body of words, and that changed on weather patterns. So weather patterns that are all produced by National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, pulling out different words when different weather patterns shift and making poetry out of that. And I make a lot of generative music that way too. And I just love the idea that the internet has this connective tissue to offer us. So all of the things going on in the world, so many of them are connected to the internet. And if we could just find a way to, again, show that with a sense of beauty, I think that's just a really good way to use something in a new way, in a way that the internet probably wasn't intended for. And I think we ourselves are such fantastic creatures. I think awe in ourselves is such a cool thing to think about. We can observe ourselves in new ways, and it's kind of been in fun exploration. This is work that was shown in the Venice Biennale at the European Cultural Center in 2019, and it looked at this idea of what is the self-portrait now in 2019, 2020, and then in the future, and what does the selfie have to do with anything artistic? And I started with taking a 64 still images, kind of full height still images, and I did this work along with Josh Borsman as well. And we took full height images, and I took a transparency and made each image 1/64th transparency. So these images weighed in and out of each other. And those images were tied to data that was connected to Fitbits. So we wore Fitbits throughout the Venice Biennale, and they recorded our heart rate, but also importantly our sleeping patterns. So they would look at when we went into a REM state versus a deep sleep state, and those images would be impacted in the gallery as we went in and out of these sleep states. And it kind of ended up being this kind of new way of looking at the selfie, new way, which I exclusively do not take selfies. Well, I don't think I do. I certainly wouldn't put them on Instagram, not my thing. But this was an exciting way to share and push what that is, and the idea of looking at ourselves in new ways and letting people sort of giving people a little bit of insight to what's going on in this kind of connective internet tissue kind of way. The idea of someone in Italy looking at these images and these moving, gracefully wading in and out images, and kind of making this kind of connection that, oh, this is someone, I'm seeing someone in this kind of funny way. I'm watching someone sleep. It's kind of strange. But I actually think it's quite beautiful and really pushes well on this idea of kind of finding awe in that layer of connection. And not all awe is beautiful. Certainly not. And there is a lot of pain in the world, and it's very important to connect with that pain as well. And this project here was a project done with StoryCorps and Hank Willis Thomas in Mass Design Group out in Boston. And it specifically looks at the gun violence in America. And it wasn't to have an opinion on gun control or anything like that. It was much more to have a look and to make connections with the people that have been victims of gun violence. So there's tiny objects in each one of these glass bricks that were gifted to us by families of gun violence. And I made music over the top of that. And I did that by taking high fidelity recordings of the most commonly used guns in gun violence. And those recordings were time stretched and pitch shifted to become music. And so as you walk through the space, you're hearing these gunshots kind of played as these abstracted, otherwise violent noises, and they become kind of beautiful music. And there's of course a narrative about that, and people walking through can kind of feel that connection to these people and to that that sort of usually destructive energy, and kind of be in that as they walk through the exhibition. And kind of a interesting kind of iteration on this idea of having a sound be part of a thing that connects you to pain. This was a piece that is a prototype that's was explorations for Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, where I looked at putting transducers, those small pucks that are on the back of that church pew, connecting those to church pews and filling those, filling a room full of these, and being able to sit in this dark room. And what happens is the transducers put a really strong sonic signal, nearly subsonic, through that pew. The pew has a really big warm vibration that is this kind of resonant speaker sound that is made through this really heavy wood. And every 40 seconds, a wave of energy is sent through these church pews. And every 40 seconds is the WHO metric for suicide. So someone ends their own life approximately every 40 seconds. And it's just a way to say that we're going to use, sound as a way, and sculpture as a way to connect people with a rather phenomenal thing in the human experience, and part of what happens in the world. And to get people to kind of focus on that and to feel that scale is something I find very important in the work. And this idea that data can be a source of awe, and we don't really think of data as the stock market and metrics on by the CDC on how many people have died of COVID or something like that. But I actually find that there's a lot of awe in data, especially when it's presented in kind of special ways. And this is a prototype for an exhibition that looks at the birth rate and the idea of how many people come into the earth every moment. And the WHO statistics on the birth rate are about 4.3 births per second. So in a room full of Tibetan singing bowls with these little robotic mallets on them, each hitting at a normalized 4.3 times a second, this whole room fills full of this warm Tibetan singing bowl sound. And it is a way to ingest this data in a very, very different way than the frontal lobe reading kind of thing that we do all day long with our phones and on the internet. So it's just a way to say that data can be a source of awe, and that presenting that data in interesting ways and resonant, no pun intended, ways is I think a beautiful thing. And there's something to be said about awe and juxtaposition. I think I've been finding this in work. And juxtaposition, of course, in design is a used to death word, but I think it has a lot of validity in this kind of way that I'm using in this particular sculpture. And the sculpture is delightfully simple. It is a metal tube that is painted ultramatte black as this almost invisible finish, and it has a really simple extension cord coming out of it. And that extension cord, when you plug it in, creates bird song. So there's tiny speakers in this aluminum housing, and when you plug it in, it just starts chirping and tweeting. And the juxtaposition here is obvious. This really delightful sound of nature inside this rather austere kind of sculpture, a simple kind of dumb sculpture in so many ways. I really love combining those, and I think a room full of these is such a delightful thing. I've made 11 of them, and when they're all working together, it's quite a strange thing, and I think that strangeness is a really cool thing to connect with. There's the idea of awe in a journey, and I think everyone can relate to this in tales and stories of adventures. And in this particular funny little envelope is something that is going to be sent to space. So I have payload on a rocket that will be going up, and this little envelope has all sorts of has a little microchip on it from a USB thumb drive, and it has all sorts of things. It has like family videos of mine. It has poetry that I write, different photos. It has music on it, and I just put a bunch of things on that drive. I'll put this in the envelope. The space agency is going to put it in the rocket, and they're going to shoot it up, and it's going to go around the Earth a few times, and then come back down, and that will be that. And I think, this is just a thumb drive. It's really simple. It's really dumb. And just the fact that it's gone on that journey is just kind of special. In fact, I told my little brother that I was going to put, our family videos online, and it got like the best kind of reaction. He was just like so delighted that, like, how cool is that? That's just it's a funny thing. But just going on that journey is an exciting thing. I'll kind of leave you with a few things. I think awe is everywhere. So if my work didn't convey that, I've done a poor job, but I think you kind of get it by now. And I spend the majority of my time looking for awe. I highly recommend, maybe not doing that, but maybe finding a time to do that every day. I think we can do that in books. I think we can find that in our children. I think we can buy a $5 magnifying glass and go look at a tree, and you've got your material, you've got your tool. Take some time to do that. Find someone you're comfortable with, that you're social distancing with, and just look at their eyes for a second. Just like look them in the eyes as hard as you can. Take that magnifying glass out and look even closer. You will find awe. It is super odd. Everything around us is incredible and weird, and it is very much a healthy thing and a nurturing thing to connect with those amazing things that we're absolutely encased in. It's free, which is really cool. It's everywhere, and it's absolutely life-giving. And kind of the last thing I'm going to leave you with, and it's quirky, so trust me, hopefully it makes sense, but I mentioned that I make a lot of music in this sort of generative way, and using data and sensors and things like that. And I'm going to leave you with this video that's just B-roll from the studio. It's just, videos that I've kind of taken here and there. They're not beautifully shot, but I think they've been put together. I've had help from Chris Latouche, who's an awesome videographer. He works with all sorts of crazy people. And he's kind enough to put this video together for me. And so I wanted to share with you. And in the backdrop is some music playing. And the music playing is from work that I've shown in Bend before, and I wanted to show it again. And this is an abstraction on top of music that I made for the 2017 Biennale with Josh Borsman and Jonathan Warman. And it's made from ocean data, and I love sharing this because it's one of the first kind of real examples of this data music that I make, that I've been making for a long time, and just this is sort of its first congealing. And I'll let you listen to it and watch this B-roll video, and I hope that you find it kind of beautiful and poetic and quirky and interesting. And I really just want to leave you with the idea that I would love it very much if you would go out and try it on for size to go find some awe sometime soon. Thank you so much for letting me share with you. I hope you are able to find some awe and enjoy the process of finding it.